whole Western civilization is based on an assumption. The assumption is that there is a split within reality between what we call the external reality, matter, and the internal reality, mind. I personally believe that matter and mind ultimately are one, or to express it in other words, have the same source. So if one goes extremely to the outside, like modern science has gone this way in the beginning of the 20th century by first discovering the theory of relativity, 1905 by Albert Einstein, and then simultaneously discovering quantum physics. They went extremely to the outside by going into matter. And this going into matter has two paths. One path is going into the microcosm, looking at the smallest particles of physical reality, and the other direction is going to the cosmological scale of the galaxies and the universe. So one way resulted in the development of quantum physics, and the other way developed into the development of general relativity, theory of gravitation, and modern cosmology. But the interesting thing is that the more the human mind tried to enter into the objective nature of matter, looking at the atoms, looking at the elementary particles, looking even if there is something more basic than or more fundamental than the elementary particles, trying to discover the ultimate object, what matter really is. The more the human mind tried it in the beginning of the last century, the more it discovered that the ultimate object isn't really an object. The ultimate object, the physical reality on the quantum level, is not an object anymore, but it again develops subjective features. It cannot be described anymore independently from the observer which does the experiment or which observes physical reality. So the more the human being tried to look into the objective nature of the external material reality, the more he discovered that ultimately this matter turns out to be a mirror in which he discovers himself. So that's a funny thing. We try to make matter an object, try to separate it as far as possible from our own subjective conscious nature, and the more we do it, the more we suddenly rediscover that the object we are looking at it is not separated from the observing subject, which is our conscious self. So this is something amazing. It was an amazing discovery at the beginning of the last century, which shocked the physicists. Therefore Niels Bohr said, if you're not shocked by quantum physics, you didn't understand it. And simultaneously, in the same times, Sigmund Freud was the first to publish scientific papers on the exploration of the subconscious by psychoanalysis. So I consider therefore 1896 to be a very important event for science. On the one hand, a great revolution was caused leading to quantum physics to discover the subjective nature of the so-called objective matter. On the other hand, by exploring scientifically the innermost psychic reality, the innermost subjective reality of the subconscious, by the research of Sigmund Freud and later Viktor Frankl and Alfred Adler and Carl Gustav Jung, something like the objective nature of the human psyche was discovered, simultaneously to the great genius discoveries of quantum physics. What do I mean by the objective nature of the human psyche? This is even as amazing, or for me even more amazing discovery than the revolutionary insights of quantum physics, what Carl Gustav Jung discovered, that if we go very deep into the essence, into the nature of this human psyche, into our own subjectivity, we at one point enter into an inner space which is not just a subjective space anymore, but a space, a mind, which all of us belonging to the human species share with each other, so that this inner space, which Jung called the collective subconscious, is not subjective anymore in the sense of it just belongs to me, it is just depends on my own inner perception, but it's something which we all share as human beings. So if you go very deep into your own psyche, you cannot call it my own psyche anymore, but it's a space which we share. Jung discovered this empirically by looking at the dreams and the experiences of 10,000s of patients within his own practice of psychology and psychoanalysis, but also with many others dealing with the subjects. It wasn't a religious or spiritual assumption, but an empirical observation. There is something within ourselves which is collective, which is objective, which is an inheritance of the human being, and which has on a very deep level something like an objective absolute knowledge, something which transcends the subjectivity of our individual consciousness. So if we look very deeply within, we find something like an objective psyche, and if we look very far to the outside reality which we observe, we come to something like a subjective matter. So the outer space becomes subjective and the inner space becomes objective. Therefore, I'm very strongly convinced that if we go very far outside, and if we go simultaneously very deep inside, we meet at the same point. That the subjective matter and the objective psyche turn out to be the same one reality. So I believe this time in which we are living now is very amazing, and it's very important in the history of humanity, because we made an extremely sophisticated progress in the development of consciousness.